Welcome back, second pagers. This is Beyond the First Page, book club with siblings Phoebe, Isaac, and Phil. I'm Phoebe.
And I'm Isaac.
I'm Phil.
And today we are talking about The Hearts Invisible Furies by John Boyne. And I know that there has been a lot of hype around this book. I feel like there was, at least. This has been a popular read with our followers. So very excited to talk about it with you guys. Just really quickly, before we get started, two things. If you like this podcast, please follow us on social media, follow us on Spotify or YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. And also, we will be talking about major spoilers and plot points throughout this podcast. So our recommendation is read the book ahead of time and then listen to the podcast, and then you won't get anything spoiled for you. So with that, I think we will go into this book in 60 seconds. So if you haven't read the book in a while, but you're trying to listen, this will be a great reminder for you. Essentially, there is a woman in the 1930s in Ireland who, she's really a girl, actually, gets pregnant outside of wedlock, and her priest denounces her in front of the entire church, yells at her to get out, physically throws her out of the church. She moves to Dublin, where she meets a gay couple, a closeted gay couple, and they're living together. She starts living with them until one of the men's father comes and kills him in his home. And then she has the baby and gives it up for adoption. And that's who the main character of the book is, Cyril. So Cyril is adopted by Maud and Charles Avery, and he is not actually allowed to call them mom and dad. He calls them his adoptive parents, and he calls them by their first name for their entire life. The first part of the book is he's coming of age in Ireland, and he's realizing, he comes to terms with the fact that he's gay, and he's in love with his roommate and best friend, Julian. He then subsequently marries Julian's sister, and during the reception leaves, runs away from his life, and goes abroad to Amsterdam, where he meets his partner, and they adopt a young teenager there. They move to America because his partner is an AIDS doctor. His partner ends up getting killed because he's gay. So Cyril finally moves back to Ireland. He connects with a biological son he didn't know he had, and also his mother that was living in Dublin the entire time, and they cross paths throughout the book. We picked this book originally because, did I leave anything out? I feel like that was a very,
That was very good.
yeah, clear synopsis.
Very thorough.
We picked this book. I picked this book actually because my mom and grandmother had both recommended it. I got it for Christmas for my grandmother, and I think their book club originally picked it, and their book club is awesome, run by a actually previous teacher of Isaac's, a fourth grade teacher, and it never misses. They give great recommendations out of there. So true to the word, they did not miss. I read this actually hard copy.
Yeah, I listened to it
as well. Is that our first hard copy read?
Yes.
I think out of all of us, yeah.
So briefly, Isaac, do you want to talk about the Michelin star scale really quickly before we give our ratings?
Yeah, so it's based on a 1, 2, or 3 around the Michelin star scale. So number 1 would be a good but nothing special, wouldn't bring it up to a friend. And number 2, you would recommend to a friend and a great book. And number 3, an amazing book and you would read it again.
Yeah, I gave it a 2. I don't think I would read it again, but very good and would recommend.
I gave it a 2 as well. I think it's one of those books that I would, like, as I recommend it to people, remember funny little things in it and kind of like chuckle to myself. There was a lot of humor, which I think we'll get into. A lot of obviously sad parts too, with Phoebe's synopsis there, you can tell, but some just very hysterical interactions, I thought. So I thought it was good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I gave it a 2 as well. I think for me, and we'll recommend books at the end, but I think for me, there was a lot of hype around this book. Like I said, many people recommended it to me. I posted it on my personal Instagram, and so many people commented like, "Oh, I love that book. It's a great book." One of my friends who's big into reading said it was probably her most favorite book of the year thus far, and it had the potential to be the best book she's read this year. And I just think if you're talking about the AIDS epidemic in the 60s, or the struggle with, I mean, the internal struggle with coming out to your family. I think this was far and beyond the best book for that. But there was other great books that do this that I think are overlooked. I don't think I could give it a 3 just because maybe there was just too much hype around the book for me. And so then it was not a letdown, but it just wasn't a 3 for me.
That sort of gets into a little bit of what you're saying, Phoebe, about how it was hyped. I do think there are books, and I think you have it in the document here, like Where the Crawdads Sing, where I couldn't even get through that book. Well, it was partly like the narrator, but I just didn't really think it was really great. And a lot of it was because of the hype, probably. No, but I really liked the entire book and don't actually think that, I mean, it was about being gay, but there were much more plot points in it, and it was a really good internal dialogue. And I do think that it was set in a time period that was really interesting for me to read about, as far as being gay just being so not even not normalized, but like criminalized. And I think that that is one of the craziest things about history to me, of how quickly this specific issue went from like nobody approved to you're a bigot if you don't approve. I think there's clips of Hillary Clinton in the 90s, who was one of the most progressive politicians back then, just being like, I don't really know how I feel about this. But by 2015, you were extremely conservative. You're not okay with it, to the point where I've heard people say about now coming out, like, it's really just not that big of a deal anymore. You know what I mean? And that's 30 years. That's wild.
I still think, though, it was for I'm 28. I think for my friends who were gay, who came out to their parents, it was a challenge.
Right. I guess it depends, definitely, your family life,
Mhm.
but I guess you're surprised now if someone our age is still closeted because they don't feel accepted. Like, it's a more unique, I would say that's more unique than coming out and just being okay with it.
Yeah.
I guess.
I think politically, you're right, Phil. It has become a non-issue, but socially and personally and emotionally, I imagine it's still a pretty big event probably in your life, just because most of the world is still skewed to the heterosexual relationship. So it's probably still a big deal, but right. I do agree. I think the topic itself has become a lot easier to talk about, and from a political spectrum wise, yes, is a non-issue now.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, and I would say too, just being very careful of not understanding. I guess I do think politically, yes, it is much more accepted. However, I do think there are states in the United States where gay people do not want to live because they cannot easily adopt a child, or they cannot easily. Yeah. I've just been exposed to this a lot more, like as my friends start to have kids, and the challenges that gay people face still. I think it's like anything else, like racism, things are more insidious. They're harder to see, but that doesn't mean that they're not there. So yeah, I definitely agree with you.
And I live in probably the most liberal part of the United States. Mm-hmm. So I'm also a little bit out of perspective there, for sure.
I think that's a good point, Phoebe.
So wait, let's add a little levity to this. I do think that there's a lot of Isaac talked about these funny conversations that were happening. And I do think the one that I was actually just like, holy crap, this is hilarious, is when he brought over all the jurors to try to bribe them. Just so ridiculous that, well, one, he was just completely lying about being an attentive father, but and this is like not, pedophilia is not funny, but how this author approached really serious issues was hilarious. Yeah. This guy was basically an English teacher at an all-boys school, and he goes, "How old are you?" to the kid, and Cyril says, I'm 7. And the guy goes, oh, that's my favorite age, between 6 and 10.
I had that written down as a quote too. I was like, that is
And I
so
was
funny.
dying. But then it just devolves into this just fight. The guy comes in after he slept with his lawyer's wife. It's so funny that Charles is just
Yeah.
an idiot. And I do think that that's a little bit of what, like, we can say that, where who knows if Charles would have been okay with Cyril being gay, but he had automatically had that relation. Well, I doubt he would have been, but like one of the biggest things is that he automatically had the relationship where he himself was a womanizer. And so he was always expecting Cyril to be a womanizer. And even to the point of just when he is caught with the 2 girls when Julian gets kidnapped, and he's like, oh, of course you're with the ugly one. Just
Yeah.
Well, so what you just said, Phil, brought up, not to take it away from the funny part, we can get back to that, but what you brought up reminded me. So this idea that one thing that I took when he came out to Alice years later, and she said, why did you never tell Julian? He would have understood. Why did you never tell me? I would have understood. And I do think, yes, what he did to Alice was so bad. He jilted her. He never communicated with her. He left her to raise his son alone. I do think that was bad. But I think that, and I'm guilty of this too, where I almost want to identify people's sexuality. Like I just want to know, and I think people make it about themselves and not about the person who's trying to come out, right? So her whole thing was, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell me? Instead of, I can't imagine what you were going through to be in love with your best friend in a time period where your partner got killed because he was homosexual. And I do think even today, many people are guilty of making people coming out about them. And it's not about that, right? It's about, like Isaac said, this is a big event in someone's life, and it's about them and what they're going through in that time, That was my only thought. I wanted to bring that back.
And just to add on to that, like, yes, they maybe would have been okay with it, but the law was still not okay with it. In Ireland, I think that was like the late 60s when he was supposed to be getting married, or maybe early 60s. It was still illegal. Like, you would go to jail for being gay. Yeah. So maybe his good friend would understand, or maybe he wouldn't, because he was also a womanizer and still wouldn't. Another really funny thing, wouldn't let up on the fact that when they first met, he has them pull down their pants to compare their penis sizes as 7-year-olds. And then the rest of his life tells the story as in Cyril wanting to see Julian's penis. And it gets brought up every time they interact, almost.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I do think that it's not only about being about you. I did think that was incredibly, I think there's a lot of things that Cyril is sort of annoying about, and you get his inner thoughts and his actions, and he's sort of cowardly. But one thing he never backtracks on, I don't think, is just this internal knowing that it would not have been okay. You would not have been okay with it.
Right.
Everyone wants to think that they could have handled it.
Right.
They would have been accepting, because this is how it turns out. But yeah, I did think it was pretty admirable that he never gaslighted himself. He was like, I mean, I handled it the wrong way. I shouldn't have abandoned you at the reception, but we wouldn't have been friends after this. You know what I mean?
But did you think he was a coward?
I think he did cowardly things, yeah. I mean, I think the entire engagement with Alice was horrible, and he recognized the entire time that he was being a coward, yeah.
Yeah.
But he does admit that, I think if he was a real person and he could go, he would have just been like, why didn't I just go to Amsterdam when I was 21, But that's a lot easier, obviously, looking back than to say that than to in the moment.
I did think that the other reason that I gave this a 2 was I found it to be very far-fetched and a bit predictable. And I was wondering what you guys thought about that too. I mean, I knew from the time he left Alice that he had a son. Or that he had a kid at least. I put that together, like, obviously you knew she was trying to tell you that he had a kid. The whole him running into his mother several times throughout his life before meeting her, and her being the first person he ever comes out to. I just found that to be, it was just the whole thing was a bit far-fetched. Him meeting Julian, getting AIDS, which wasn't that far-fetched at that time period, but then being in New York at Mount Sinai where his partner was treating AIDS patients. It just was all a little too good to be true, a bit.
I like that part of it, actually.
Yeah, I don't think it was going for realistic. I don't think that I think there was a lot of happenstance that was the goal of the author. I mean, he wouldn't have done the dramatic irony at the beginning where the reader's aware of the mother-son relationship the entire time if that wasn't his goal. I think the one point of that wasn't planned was maybe the kid. I didn't really think of that too much, of the I have to talk to you. I thought Alice actually figured out that he was gay and was going to tell him that it was okay. I didn't see the son coming. Then again, I'm also just like the easiest reader to be strung along. I don't think at all in the future.
Right.
I'm just there for the ride.
Right.
Yeah, I also guessed that she was pregnant, but I didn't mind sort of the ironic or serendipitous interactions with the mother or running into Julian later. I thought it was kind of cool. I liked that part of it. And I liked that you knew the mom the whole time as it was going along. You know, because this wasn't a true story. This was a novel. So it adds some drama to it. So.
And the same thing with, what is her name?
Mary Margaret.
Mary Margaret.
No, although she was hilarious.
That would not be up to my standard.
No, Charlotte Hennessy.
Oh, was a juror.
Was one of the jurors that he was trying to bribe. Yeah. Things like that, I think, made it interesting. I think we could talk a whole thing about Mary Margaret. Just
some brutal deaths, like just
right.
Yeah.
Like the pillar falling on her. The priest, literally, he confessed. Actually, that was the first person he came out to.
The priest dying. Yeah, that was hilarious.
Yeah.
But also, just the whole way that happened, the priest is just like, confess everything. And he's telling him all these sex stories. I gave poor guys a hand job. Just so explicit. Instead of being like, I'm attracted to men.
No, those were, he just had thoughts at this point. He was just like a kid still. He hadn't actually actioned on anything.
No, I thought in the confession he told. Oh, it was all of
his fantasies.
Fantasies. That's right.
It's the Catholic guilt.
Because he was, it is the Catholic guilt for sure.
Yeah, that was so funny.
It's so funny.
Yeah. And every time he has because he has this internal struggle of, especially when he was younger, like, I need to get rid of this. He still thought of it as like a bad thing. And every time he had a chance or either by his own doing or, with the cop and Mary Margaret following him, he was going to be exposed. He escapes it with either a gruesome death or at the end, he just runs.
Yeah.
I do think that's a little bit, I don't know, because it does make you think cowardly, but then, I mean, he was literally going to get arrested.
He was going to get killed.
He was going to go to, he was going to,
So that's why I didn't think he was a coward, because I really thought the only time he was a coward was with Alice on their wedding. He should have told her that first night in the bar.
Well, that's what I was saying.
Yeah.
That's where the biggest part.
But he was risking his life every time he went to have like alley sex, which, it's just wild to be exposed to that and think about that.
But why was he doing that? Why was he risking it? Oh, just in case he had been caught up.
Yeah, if he had been, if someone who was not the police had spotted him, likely he would have been beaten to death. And if the police had spotted him, he probably would have still been beaten to inches within his life and then brought in to go to jail. Yeah. So how about his mom not wanting to be famous she was like disgusted with the
So
idea of
funny.
being famous. She would have been appalled. And then the fact that she slapped that reporter in the face whenever he was coming out of
After
the.
that's the only thing she was mad about. Her husband goes to jail. I loved the entire. So there was an entire chapter on basically Charles is so basically his parents also just treat him like an adult from age 4.
Right.
And Charles is just telling him about all of his sexual exploits with his mother. And the first night they met, they had like a 72-hour sex marathon. And he's like, it was the time of my life, boy. And then he asks his mom, how did you meet?
Adoptive mother.
I think it was a Wednesday, maybe a Thursday.
Yeah. Both the adoptive parents were so good. They were the funniest characters. And I don't know if Maud was
they were really,
just
really good.
head in the clouds, or if she was doing drugs, or because she had some parts where she seemed not lucid, like she was not all there.
Yeah. I mean, she did hit on Julian when he was 7 years old.
Oh,
Yeah.
I feel like she was just
Or she was just this
she
weird
lived in her
woman.
books. Like
Yeah. I think she was probably doing some drugs,
maybe,
though.
potentially. I think he gave a lot of people in his life a lot of grace too. And Isaac, I think you wrote down about how whenever his son is giving birth, they're talking about
hilarious.
how terrible her
Funny.
ex-husband was, and how he was homosexual and all this other stuff. And then it's him and he's there. But he really, I mean, it is this idea of how many battles do I want to pick in the day? You know, what do they call them? Filthy queers or dirty queers or something, like so derogatory. And that was just, everybody was saying it.
Yeah.
I mean, Cyril was saying it. It was just, and he had a lot of grace for everybody that said ill things or did ill things to him, I found, or at least if he didn't, that wasn't part of his internal dialogue.
Yeah. The conversation with his son's in-laws was so good. They're going on about how they don't like the gays, they don't like the lifestyle, and he like gives them enough rope to hang themselves with. And the dad was going off about this stuff, and then he butts in, oh, that's the Cyril too that plays the violin, not me, because his ex-wife marries someone else named Cyril. And then they start talking about the in-laws' son makes like the best sweet potatoes or something, and Cyril starts asking him about that. Oh, he lives with his friend, and he's in his 30s. Forever. He just hasn't found, somebody. He's lived with this guy for the last 15 years. And he's just like, these people are so clueless.
Right. Yeah, totally. What idiot.
Yeah.
I thought there was two sort of serious things that I wanted to talk about. One was, I think, the perception of home in this novel was really interesting. I think that the desire to return to places that you had no happiness, or just it was like the longing of the idea of home, even though you never felt it when you were there, of just like Cyril's desire to return to Ireland, or Inyak's desire to return to Slovakia. I just thought that was really interesting. And it wasn't shared by everyone. Like Jack Smoot has he hates it, and he's like, I'll never step foot there again. And I just wondered why do some human beings have that desire and some not? And I just wanted to hear your guys' thoughts on that.
Yeah, I thought it was very innately Irish of him. I feel like every time you see I thought about that, not in the same context, but I did think about this Irish need where and I have a quote actually where I'll read it at the end, but you love this place and you hate this place. And I do think that a lot of Irish people, if you see like Irish actors or famous people from Ireland give interviews, they have this deep pride in Ireland.
I don't think it's Irish. I just think that I think a lot of the Irish thing is because it's fun to be Irish, I guess.
Well, and because they
Irish American nowadays.
But they also had this strife between England and Ireland. Like they want to be their own independent. I don't know what I thought it was Irish, but maybe Isaac, you have something more intuitive.
I just think there's a a pull to things that are familiar to you. And, no matter, I won't say no matter what, but home is home to a certain extent, no matter what happens. And I think there's a draw to, even if it's not exactly your home, someplace that is similar, that has similar kind of characteristics, either in the landscape or the people, is always going to feel more welcoming than a foreign place to you. And I think you can move your home. And in the case of Jack Smoot's scenario, like he had something really horrific happen and the love of his life was killed. So he's like, why would I ever go back there? That erased all sense of home. Whereas Cyril, I thought, had some unfinished business in Ireland. And that really got driven home by Julian.
Maybe
but
it's that though. Do you think it's that once you have every connection being severed, then you're done? But if you have people still there, do you think there's anything about, do you think Inyak wanted to go back because he knew his grandmother was
yeah,
there?
I think you needed closure.
Yes.
What if she had died? Do you think that he would have wanted to go back at all? Because I mean, they didn't really get anything out of that visit. They ate at the pub.
I think he would have, because it's like Catherine going to Kenneth's grave, right? His dad's grave. So even though he was dead, it gave him some sort of closure.
Interesting. I liked that there were no typical family relationships in this book. And it seemed like Cyril had the opportunity to forego every single one of them and chose not to in every single situation, which I thought was really interesting. I don't think his biological stuff, where his son and his mother, but then his adoptive stuff and his adoptive Inyak, and even sort of like calling Jack Smoot his family because he was his mother's friend. I don't know. I just thought that he did not forego any relationships that I think a lot of people would. I mean, that's a lot of responsibility, but also just he still pursued his relationship with Charles when Charles was in prison and had done nothing for him. And I thought that was really interesting, I guess.
I think, like Guy said, he did have a lot of grace for the people in his life. And I also think he didn't I cried. The part of the book that I cried at was when Bastian finally showed up for him in heaven, or he said, whereas he was looking for one specific person to visit him on earth before he died. And I think it's because he needed those relationships. He didn't have the one person that he really wanted to be on earth with. And I think it was also partially, I agree with you, he could have very easily at least severed some of those connections. But I do think if you lose somebody like that, it does leave a void, and he needed all those people to fill it too, maybe.
Yeah, for sure. And he kept all those connections, but those were really the only close connections he had. I think especially living in kind of the hiding that he did the majority of his young life. He had his friend Julian, but even his bachelor party was just Julian and the guys that he had currently worked with. Those were his only friends. He wasn't that really close with anyone. So the relationships he did keep, which is, I think, a good lesson for all of us, pick your, hold on to those relationships, because there is maybe going to be a time in life when you're going to need them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. I wanted to get your guys, this was my one thing I wanted to talk about. I liked the way that he introduced something to where like Alice and him were getting married, and then the author brought it back to, and here's how that happened. I kind of liked, but it was in mini segments. It wasn't a very long drawn out period of time, but it was, now I'm back in Ireland and I've met my son a couple times, and here's what happened to get us to that point. He kind of backtracks. So he sets the stage with the current situation, and then he backtracked. And I don't like when authors do too much foreshadowing, when they're like, this was the worst day of my life, and then you're stressed about what's going to happen in the book. But I liked how John Boyne set up this story to kind of tell what was happening and then tell how we got there. I don't know if you noticed that or liked it or didn't.
Yeah, I think I liked that. I like when movies do that as well.
I thought it was cool as
Yeah.
well because he the different parts of the book would jump several years at some points. He left
Right.
his wedding, and then the next segment of the book was 7 years later or something in Amsterdam. And throughout that segment of the book, he slowly gets back to everything that happened, which was cool.
Right.
I also
Yeah.
just thought, wow, the Jack Smoot character having almost the exact same thing happen twice, and then they kill Inyak's dad and dispose of him was just wild.
The
Yeah.
entire Inyak thing. Did you see that Pimp was his dad, Phoebe?
Yeah.
No, but you saw that coming. I didn't. I mean, you
Oh,
talked about
oh,
how
no,
predictable
no,
it
no.
was.
Oh,
I didn't
yeah,
see
I
that
thought you
coming.
meant like, did I read the book? I did not see that coming. No, I can't imagine.
Yeah.
That was the other thing. This book was very dark in my opinion, and I'm surprised Isaac, because you were saying last book. I was worried about you, Isaac. I was like, should I check in on him? Because last book you were saying was dark. If you think that book was dark, this book was freaking dark. And we got several comments that Casual Vacancy was very dark, and that wasn't necessarily I mean, there was definitely dark parts for sure, but that wasn't my perception. But this book was much more dark, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think last book was. I think this book was dark, but I don't think this book was. You could not find a way to tell this book lightly,
Right.
I guess.
Yeah.
You can't really talk about the AIDS epidemic and gay persecution and be like, but it was okay.
Right.
You probably couldn't go through the Irish Revolution and not know that bad shit was happening when people were getting kidnapped
by the IRA. That was the other thing.
Yeah, that was just wild. Just like Julian was, and then was friends with this kidnapper. Oh my gosh, Damien. Yeah, me and Damien still talk.
Yeah, I think just to bring back to the darker, when I didn't necessarily find this book dark. It was heavy at parts, for sure. I thought it was offset by the humor and a lot of the dialogue, and even Cyril's straightforwardness, which I also thought a lot of times was pretty funny. But I don't know, dark. Yeah, I think Phil did a good job summing it up, but it wasn't dark, but there was some heavy spots for sure. Like when Catherine in the beginning hits the dad that is attacking Jack Smoot's partner.
Mm-hmm.
Sean. Yeah, she doesn't kill him though, but all that his violence was heavy, but then their retaliation to me was obviously completely justified. So that doesn't make that dark for me necessarily. Or even when they kill Inyak's dad, it was heavy because of the action that the dad was taking, but him ending up dead and, Jack Smoot laying down the law, that seems justified to me.
That's fair. Like it was in retribution for things.
Yeah.
I don't think it was dark either. I would use the word sad, to be honest. I think the hardest parts of this book were sad.
Mm-hmm.
When the kid who had sex once died from AIDS.
Yeah.
The whole thing with Jack Smoot, when Bastian just gets murdered and leaves Cyril. I mean, I think that's just sad.
Yeah.
And everything that was cloaked in maliciousness, I think, was more to me just sad. The fact that a dad beat his son to death in the first chapter because he was gay. Mm-hmm. Malicious, yeah, but I think to me where that really gets me is it's just really sad.
The other, you could call it sad or heavy or whatnot, is just the sexuality in this book and kind of what Cyril struggles with, especially in his younger years in Ireland when he's sneaking out to the hidden known rendezvous points for gay men, and how almost ashamed he is of doing that, but then being like, well, what else am I supposed to do? This is the only thing I can do. So I thought that was kind of, I guess sad is a good word, of just how sexually he was really messed up for, I think, quite a while until he found Bastion and was like, wow, this is possible to just live with somebody and love them, and that's it.
His entire trying to painfully take away his
Oh yeah, when the
eroticism
doctor
with that doctor.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah. So I think that's the kind of stuff that was sad or heavy, but not necessarily dark to me. But were the I think
Yeah.
the bigger points of the book that John Boyne did a great job of making you feel like, damn, people really had to go through this shit.
Recently.
I think the entire AIDS epidemic is honestly one of the, I mean, besides the movie Philadelphia, if I hadn't seen Philadelphia with Tom Hanks, I don't think I would really know about it. I wouldn't know the severity of it. I wouldn't know the treatment of gay people being, and that's the problem we saw with COVID. And now imagine if the only people that ever had to wear masks were gay. That was the situation, except it was worse because it was easy to believe in AIDS because you could never get it. It wasn't your fault. All you had to do was steer clear of those gay people.
Right.
But that wasn't necessarily true. Other
wild.
people were, heterosexual people were getting it.
No,
Yeah.
It wasn't true at all. It wasn't not necessarily true. It was completely untrue. Julian died from AIDS.
Well, and it was also it was such an easy excuse to then further steer clear of gay people because there was
Persecute.
already so much
Yeah.
prejudice, right? So then obviously,
Yeah.
well, I can't interact because I could get AIDS, which was wildly untrue. Yeah, I had a lot of quotes actually. I'll only read a couple.
Yeah, let's read them.
I did think it was funny. I won't read this one, but the Mr. Wilscott Senior, Junior, and the dad, like 3 Mr. Wilscotts, and he said, "I hope one of them either retires or gets hit by a bus so I can join their group instead of having to work with Mr. Demby Demby and the other group of people." I thought it was funny that all those 3 men all called themselves Mr. Wilscott in the public place. It'd be like if the 3 of us were together, I'd be like, "Hello, Mr. Cornell. Hello, Mrs. Cornell." Like, it was so weird.
Just a note on Mr. Demby Demby, also a great character. Great name. Oh, just so funny. I thought he was awesome.
Yeah, it's so funny.
He was good.
The other one was there's no gays in Ireland. It was the doctor. He said, but are you not listening to me? He asked, smiling at me as if I was a complete ignoramus. Amen. After telling you that there are no homosexuals in Ireland. And if there are no homosexuals in Ireland, then how on earth can you be one? And then we had posted about what people's favorite parts of the book were. And one of our members said whenever Cyril came out to his mom. And so this is the quote from that. When I looked up, I saw that Mrs. Goggins' eyes had filled with tears and she had taken her handkerchief from her pocket to wipe them away. "Don't mind me," she said, attempting a smile. "It's just that I find this kind of violence very upsetting. I've seen it before, and I know where it can lead." "You won't tell anyone, will you?" I asked. "Tell them what?" "What I just told you, that I'm not normal." "Ah, Jesus," she said, laughing as she stood up. "Don't be ridiculous. We're none of us normal, not in this fucking country." I thought that was a good, like, her being from Ireland and coming out to his mom. And then this was I loved this quote. I wrote it like several times. This is when he goes up to, they're just in the wedding reception. He goes up to the balcony and he's naked on the balcony and he's looking out across Dublin. But this was Dublin, the nation's capital, the place of my birth and a city that I loved at the heart of a country I loathed. A town filled with good-hearted innocents, miserable bigots, adulterous husbands, conniving churchmen, paupers who received no help from the state, and millionaires who sucked the lifeblood from it. Glancing down, I watched as the cars drove around the green, the horses and traps filled with tourists and taxis pulled up to the hotel. The trees were bursting into full verdure, and I wished I could simply spread my arms and take flight, soar above them, and look down a lake before ascending into the clouds like Icarus, happy to be scorched by the sun and disintegrate into nothingness. I just thought that was cool. He was looking out, reflecting on Dublin, kind of to your point, Bill, about wanting to go home, loving this city, but hating the country and all the bigots inside of it. And also just his struggle with wanting to take his own life, right? He wanted to be free from this situation that he had caused for himself and just, a place where that was not accepting of him. I thought it was a really beautiful paragraph.
It is.
Yeah, I think I had a quote that I just thought was hilarious. It was just that you can write everything you know about a woman on the back of the postage stamp in large capital letters and still have room for the Lord's Prayer. I think that just sounds like a dad's
that-
Who
quote.
said that?
That's what Maud said to Charles when he was telling her about why he was sleeping with his solicitor's wife.
Yeah.
Wait, so Maud said that about women?
Maud was telling that to Charles. Charles is like, I know women, Maud.
Oh.
And he's like,
Yeah.
she said that to him.
He knew that as much as he knew.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which I thought was a sick burn.
Very
Yeah.
good. Very Maud. I just had one that I couldn't include the whole thing, but it was that conversation we talked about before with Liam's in-laws, how they're going on and on about, and this dad is talking about how his wife doesn't have sex with him anymore, and then he goes off on all this offensive stuff about homosexuals, and he said, I began to wonder if he was trying to be offensive or was just an idiot.
That was a good one. Yeah. That is funny.
Well, so I talked about what books I think that people should read if they like this book. I think The Great Believers is definitely my number one by Rebecca Makkai. This is a book that truly delves into the horrific issues of the AIDS epidemic, specifically in America in the 1960s. It's an absolutely fabulous book. I highly recommend it to all of our listeners, especially if you liked this book. The other one was Shuggie Bain. It's set in Glasgow, and it is also a coming of age about a boy who has a very troubled life and is also, I would say, coming to terms with his sexuality or struggling with his sexuality. And then the last one is Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. And that's just another story about two men who fall in love and fall in and out of love. And it's just a complicated love story about two gay men. So all three I would highly recommend if you liked the Hearts Invisible Furies.
Mine was actually the Century Trilogy by Ken Follett, and I think you've either read this one, Phoebe, or I recommended it to you.
I've read Pillars of the Earth.
No, it's a different one completely. It basically tracks 5 families throughout World War I, World War II, and then the Cold War / the Civil Rights Movement. And it's each different generation of the families, but it's like a couple German families, a couple Russian families, a couple American families. And it's just very interesting because it goes very well through what were the norms at the time and even in each respective political environment. I think it was really eye-opening to me in a lot of completely different ways than this one, but just sort of like the rise of fascism in Britain in the 1930s, like never even knew about sort of the struggles of living in West Berlin or just living in Berlin in general when the Russians came and sacked that city during World War II. Just a lot of things that you never really realized were just really big tragedies and how families dealt with them and looked upon them from different perspectives. So I thought that was not a coming of age story or coming into your homosexuality at all, but the civil rights, a little bit of that same aspect with one of the Black main characters dating white women and stuff. So that was interesting. A little bit of the same dynamic.
Dang, that sounds good, Phil. I'm adding that to read, I think. Mine was The Outrun by Amy Liptrot. Unfortunately, not as humorous as this book, so the heaviness continues on. There's no real reprieve in this book, but it is a kind of coming into your own, but it's about a woman she's a girl, she's from Scotland, moves to London and becomes alcoholic, and then her recovery as she goes back home. So there's still that aspect of having to go home because she did want to get away from it and then does go back to recover. But I thought of it when I read this one.
Is she gay, Isaac?
No, she's not gay.
Okay, interesting. And then book news and what we're reading. So Phil, what are you reading currently?
I'm currently reading the third book of the Farseer trilogy that you just finished, Phoebe, because I had recommended it to Phoebe and then she wanted to talk with me about it. And I realized I didn't remember it enough to talk about it well. And
So
before she like ruined it all for me again, I was just like, okay, I'm going to reread it so we can talk.
wait, so let's talk really quickly because I think Isaac should also I think actually we should throw this in the book club. We should make this a book club book.
Yeah.
It's so
Robin
good.
Hobb she's the woman that is the man. She's so good. And all of her trilogies, I think she might write in exclusively trilogies, which is
Amazing.
super badass.
Yeah.
But she is probably the best fantasy author of describing magic systems, basically. She's so good at it, and you understand how everything works. But her characters are also just really well developed. I don't know. It's a fun read.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, I just finished this trilogy, as Phil said, and this I wanted to recommend it to you, Isaac, and to all of our listeners because I think if you call yourself a fantasy lover and you haven't read Robin Hobb, you're doing something wrong. And I fell prey to this right before this, but it's really, really good. The Assassin's Apprentice is the first one. I think there's like 16 books in this.
There's at least 9 in the world.
In the world, yeah. So
there's 9 in the world there's 9 with this character, and then there's another 6 in the world, I think.
Yeah. So really, really good. And I thought of you, Isaac, because something that's really cool, and I won't give it away. And like Phil said, the magic in it is so cool. There's different elements of magic, and different people have they tap into different elements. But the one is you can bond with animals and talk with them. And the main character in the first trilogy is bonded to a wolf. And it's really freaking cool. And I was like, Isaac would love this. The fact that he just has this badass wolf that anytime anyone attacks him, the wolf just comes out of nowhere and kills them. And it's such a good series. Everybody listening needs to read this. You won't regret it. It's very long, but you will not regret it.
Okay, nice. I'll add that one as well.
Yeah.
Actually, I just finished the Hercules trilogy by Glenn Iliff. It's the same author as the Odysseus series that I read. It was pretty good, not as good as the Odysseus one. And then I'm actually reading The Searcher right now. So a little plug for The Hunter, I believe, is the one on our reading list, which is the second in the series. And so far, it's pretty good. Right up my alley for the kind of book I like. So
yeah, Tana French is great. She usually picks a really good narrator too.
Yeah, the narrator's good.
Yeah, that's actually a perfect segue just to remind everybody. On May 20th, we're going to be reading The Hunter by Tana French, and that is a sequel to The Searcher, which Isaac is currently reading. As Phil said, it's a detective series, so you may not need to read The Searcher necessarily to understand what's going on in The Hunter, but it would be good if you like murder mystery, if you like Tana French, might as well just read it anyways. But we are going to be reading that on May 20th. And again, that's a sequel to The Searcher, but also by Tana French. And then the next book we're reading is The Fury.
Yep. So The Fury by Alex Michaelides is about a reclusive movie star's vacation on a Greek island that turns deadly when a murder occurs, disrupting the lives of her and her friends. The novel is a suspenseful, twisting narrative that explores themes of fame, friendship, and the lengths to which people go to protect their secrets. So, sounds like a good one. I hope everyone tunes in.
He wrote The Silent Patient, and that is why I picked this book. And if you haven't read The Silent Patient, it's a very good thriller. I've heard mixed reviews about The Fury, so we'll see what we think. But I'm excited to try it out. I really enjoyed The Silent Patient. Cool.
Great. So you want to hit them with their sign off?
Yeah, you guys know the drill. Call your siblings. Tell them that you love them. If you don't have any siblings, just call somebody that you love and tell them and talk to them about a good book you've read recently. Go to your library or use your Libby app and read a book. And other than that, stay classy, second pagers. Bye for now.
See you guys.
And I